first of the Lone Wolf Vision podcast. I've literally thought, let's just get straight into it. I haven't set up a podcast on iTunes or Spotify at this point, but how I usually work is let's just get straight into action, make things work, and this is why me and Kerry have come on to Zoom to do a call, and it's quite fresh in Kerry's mind. We've had a chat already, so a lot of this stuff, well, some of the stuff we've probably covered, but I haven't asked the specific questions, which are gonna pretty much show her journey along to the Himalayas, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, is a little bit of your journey, Kerry, from the Himalayas, but also prior to that as well at the same time. So I suppose the first question was, how was it? I've got my questions on my iPhone here. So how was the experience? Is it what you thought it would be like? And how did it go?
I don't think I could ever have imagined exactly what it was going to be like. It was the most amazing and the most challenging experiences I've ever had.
Which you'd sort of expect from somewhere like the Himalayas, quite a rustic place, and unforgiving, I suppose.
It is. I mean, I'm a person that loves my luxuries, and for 2 weeks I couldn't shower. I had no running water. Everywhere I had to go, the most treasured commodity was a roll of toilet paper. That it was just unbelievable how you had to be stripped back to real basics and what you needed to function. It was amazing.
I suppose has it given you more of an appreciation since you've got back from having that experience? I know exactly what you're talking about, because myself, I was there, I think it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I did a totally different trek to you, just so people have a bit of information of what you've actually done. So Kerry went to Everest Basecamp. What was the altitude that you got up to there? Can you put it into perspective, what that was, how high it was, first of all? Give us some numbers.
Yeah, the altitude of the base camp is 5,364 meters.
That's very precise. Well, that's good. I do that. Every meter counts when you're that high, I suppose.
It did, and I knew I'd walked up that number. So it was a bit of a goal, and it was such an achievement when we made it there. So yeah.
And I suppose one of the things that you did when you were there was you gave us a bit of a blog, I suppose. And I know we had a chat before, the previous time that we've talked, when you did come back on our weekly session. For people's information. And you met, so since when was it when we started doing the Zoom stuff? This was obviously during lockdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, during lockdown. So our very first one-to-one session was in June 2020. So yeah. I spotted you. A friend of mine had said, "Oh, there's this chap that I kind of know that's doing these yoga classes on Facebook. We've got nothing else to do. Have a go, give it a go." And I'd never done anything like that at all before. So that was probably April, May time. And then in June, I said, "Do you do like beginner stuff?" Do beginners classes, and because I live obviously a long way away from you, it all had to be done remotely. So first one-to-one, June 2020.
Yeah, and I think that's even more incredible. Is like in regards to the fitness, how would you describe your fitness level when we first met on the one-to-one Zoom, and then obviously what you've achieved in about, I mean, how long ago was it now? Probably, is it a month since about 3 weeks since you've been back?
3.5 weeks. Yeah.
But in regards to like the scale of it, like just so people know how much, because it's the full credit has to go for you, because you're very, in regards to me creating plans, etc., giving you advice on how to do something like you did. You've stuck to the plan to a T, and that's just like what you've been able to do has been a reflection of that. So how do you feel in regards to the fitness level when you first started to the point that you're at now?
To be honest, if I explained my life as a fairly sedentary one, that would be fairly accurate. I'd just been made redundant from a job that was office-based, and I was working roughly 70, 80 hours a week. In the spare time I did have, I'm a bit of an avid golfer, so I did play golf, and I still do play golf.
A bit of walking involved.
So yeah, I could walk, but it's very flat. My golf course has got.
Where do you live again, Kerry?
I live in Cheltenham in Gloucestershire.
Is that a very place, or?
Well, to kind of put the 5,364 meters into perspective, our highest hill, because we don't have mountains here, our highest hill is a hill called Cleve Hill, and it's just under 1,000 feet.
Yeah, so about 300 meters, pretty much. Yeah, so that's a bit of a difference. I don't think you're going to suffer from altitude going up that high. That's for sure.
No, that's for sure. Yeah, so where I am, it's very, very different. We're quite flat. We're sort of in the Cotswolds, so beautiful place in which to live. Yeah. And we have some undulating ground, but there is nothing that compares, nothing at all. So yeah, if I would only walk if there was a purpose. So, and very rarely there was a purpose unless it was on a golf course. And that's quite slow. Yeah. You'd sort of posture around and hit a few balls as you go. So that was the extent of what I was doing when we first met. I was suffering from back pain, which I'd had for years and years. So had a car accident when I was back at the age of 18. So the last 40 years I'd lived in pain constantly. Yeah. And I just thought, I just deal with it. You live with it, you manage it, you get on, take a few tablets when it got really bad. So it sort of restricted what I did. So I would very rarely pick stuff up off the ground, for example, because that would aggravate it. Golf was okay because I could rotate it. I couldn't go up and down. So my life was kind of restricted by constant pain anyway.
Yeah.
And as I said, a full-on office-based work that was significant in the amount of hours that I had to do.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like an important point, and we've sort of come all the way back from talking about Everest, and we've come to yoga because that's how we started, right? And that was in regards to creating the foundations for something like this to happen. It wasn't something that, and this is what I think a lot of people try to want to happen, this instant gratification, things wanting to happen overnight. You've like worked on it daily, every single morning, getting up early in it. And it's not just the yoga aspect that we started with, but also the, doing things like meditation, which, that's quite forward thinking. And it's a big part of my business Lone Wolf vision, right? Is that the meditation. So the development that you went through, it started off at yoga and then it's ended up in something climbing up to Everest Basecamp. So such a random thing. But in regards to the question here is, if you were talking to that person right at the start of when we first met, and you said you're going to go to Everest Basecamp and you're gonna get up there and you're gonna be able to achieve what you set out to do, what would you have said, or what would that person have said before?
That person, without a shadow of doubt, would have said, "Do I get a helicopter?" I wouldn't have walked up it.
Yeah.
Chance. Are there helicopters or are there trains, or what's the mode of transport? It wouldn't have been my two legs.
Yeah.
And I was a person that outwardly you would never have seen it, because I used to wear a mask all the time, and people would have said, here's a person who's full of self-confidence, very happy in their own skin, a real extrovert. Well, that was the mask, because underneath I was frightened of everything. Yeah. I am a night-to-night introvert. I struggled, I could, because of my work, stand up in front of hundreds of people and do a presentation. But if I was in a room with 5 or 6 people, I'd be the one who would be sat very quietly in the corner and not contribute. So, it's quite strange to think that there's this person who needed that safety and security, would never have dreamt of doing anything like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember very early on, and I go off on a tangent, so pull me back if you need to.
Oh, that's fine. It's a good tangent.
One of the things that we did sort of fairly early on was you talked to me about like Wheel of Life and what different aspects there were and how I would rate my life in different areas. And one of the areas you said was adventure. And I looked at it and I said, I have no adventure in my life, none whatsoever. I know we were in lockdown anyway, so everybody was restricted and you were living at home. But even if I looked beyond that, before it and afterwards, adventure didn't come into it. My entire life was safe.
Yeah. And that's important, right? That in regards to how I would explain adventure is stepping out of the unknown. That's really what adventure is going into the unknown and doing something that you're not used to doing, which is on the different end of the scale compared to being safe and secure. So yeah, I totally relate to that. And I mean, yeah, carry on. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but it just so people know what adventure sort of means. And that's like a huge adventure. And if like I'm just channeling the questions into a place here is, you were fearful in certain places, and I know one of the things was heights, right? So I mean, it's a high place to go, but not. I mean, I standing on a big lump of rock maybe doesn't seem too scary, but can you just like talk about some of the different terrain that you had to encounter during your trek, but also it's quite important, I think, is to bring back the experience that you did 6 months earlier in the West Highland Way. So I'll let you crack on with that one.
The terrain, so I'll take that in sections. The terrain was, thankfully, I had done the West Highland Way, so it kind of gave me a little bit of a sample of what the terrain might be. It was nothing like I was really expecting. I thought we'd be over snow, but a lot of it was not snow. We did have some, but not very much. There was, you start off the trek and you've got paths, sort of reasonably wide paths with, vertical drops at the one side of the path in the mountain going up vertically on the other side, but they were reasonably wide. They were fairly secure. They were very dusty, very stony. There was very little grass. We weren't walking over fields and things at all. So the terrain underfoot was very hard, unforgiving, but also unstable. And then we started off and you climb up to a place called Namchi Bazaar. And Namchi, I love Namchi. Beautiful, I don't know if you call it a town as far as the Himalayas are concerned, I guess. But to get to it, you have a lot of climbing, but the climb is with rocks and stones that are embedded into the path that act almost like steps, but the steps are all uneven. The ground that you're going to be standing on is uneven. Some of them are much deeper than my poor little legs could cope. So you're kind of trying to lift the body up on these steps as well. The terrain is constantly steep to begin with. It's relentlessly steep. But as you come up above the tree line, obviously it's colder. There's very little shelter because you're in amongst the trees before, so the sun is much stronger up there. And the ground is stony. It's you've got a lot of pebbles around as well, so it moves all the time. It's not as deep.
Yeah.
But you'll then come across up to the Kumba Glacier, and then you've got these huge rocks that you have to sort of clamber over. So it's not like going for your little walk up the road or up our hill, which you go over the fields and it's really easy. It's really tough, really tough terrain.
And tell us about the bridges, Kerry.
Oh. Yeah. Putting it into perspective as well, going up the hills here, I couldn't walk by an edge because it was too scary, because there was this drop that might be a drop of 10, 20 foot. And suddenly you'd be walking up and then there'd be this bridge. And the bridges there were over the rivers mostly, but they were quite high, and we never seemed to go over the lower ones. We always went over the higher ones, with the valley really deep below you. The wind would be blowing, so these bridges are suspended. They're metal, but they are suspended, so they move.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you walk on them, if there's somebody else walking on it, you can feel the bridge swaying side to side.
Yeah.
As their weight's being transferred. And I would be started off hanging on to either side, because they're kind of that narrow, hanging on to it, thinking, just look at the person in front of me. I couldn't look either side. I mean, it was stunningly beautiful, but I could not see it. I had to look straight in front of me and keep going and not stop. If anybody had stopped, I'd have been on my hands and knees crawling, I think, if I'd not frozen. But I think I was very surprised that I was able to do them. Yeah. Which is goes back to some of the preparation that we'd done before, which through the meditation I've then moved on to visualization. And so with my terrible fear of heights, I'd looked on YouTube to see what these bridges were like. And so I then used them in my own visualization. Say, I can do this. After the first bridge, we go over a bridge that's called Hillary's Bridge, and it is very high, it is very long, and it is very windy. But by the time we were going over there, I was holding my walking poles in one hand. I was looking around, walking without worrying about it at all. Yeah. So it's an amazing journey, but the bridges are something else.
So that's sort of using the visualization, because there's multiple ways that you have used it as well within the meditation structure that we used and we worked on. And one of them was creating that exposure of heights and experiencing it without actually being there in person. So you're able to feel the emotions, maybe little bits of, like, what sort of things would you feel in those situations if you, like previously, you know, when you did encounter a height?
Yeah, the way my body would have reacted, and it was not a conscious reaction, it was subconscious. My chest would go chest. my chest would go tight. I would start sweating. I would have to get my body as close to the ground as I possibly could, because I couldn't stay upright. I would be hanging on to the ground as low as I possibly could. And I'd sometimes, if it was what I would see as being very steep or very high, I would feel physically sick. And it's paralyzing. That type of fear is paralyzing.
I think it's one of those fears that there's a lot of people who have got a fear of heights. So it's really inspiring to be able to hear where, from being in that situation, that in regards to what you did at the end, going over the footbridges, over big high passes, etc., in the Himalayas, compared to just being on maybe a standard footbridge somewhere. That's a big journey, and something that actually you were challenged. One of the things that I said to do and about 6 months in, so we did like a 12-month program for to get to the Himalayas and complete the Everest Basecamp trek was to go and do the West Highland Way, and you encountered something where that actually really pushed you on a fair bit and probably give you a lot of self-belief, I suppose. What was it that happened there?
West Highland Way, I don't know if anybody has ever experienced walking the West Highland Way. We did 106 miles in 7 days. So we were walking day after day after day. We started off and we would walk along the banks of Loch Lomond, and I at one point walking along the banks, I thought that it would be nice and low because right by the loch itself in the water, and it was nothing like that at all. I was hanging on for grim death as I reached down to the next bit of where the path had sort of eroded to a certain extent, and hanging on by my fingertips, going backwards, trying to feel the next step with my feet. I just wanted to just sit and cry. I couldn't explain it. It was so difficult at the time, but as you continue, and we did continue because I was doing it with my husband, who thought we were just going for a walk. He soon learned not to trust me again. We saw it as just thinking about the next step. You take it one step at a time, and if all you look at is that next step, each step is achievable. And so you build those steps together, and suddenly you've managed 5 miles, 10 miles, or 22 miles, I think was our longest day. And things like the Devil's Staircase, I'd been thinking about the Devil's Staircase ever since we'd booked the trip. And I thought, I don't know how I'm going to go up that. I really don't know how I'm going to get up that. And in my own mind, I'd built this up into being something that was so frightening. Once I got up the top of the Devil's Staircase and appreciated the view from up there, I looked back and wondered what on earth I'd been frightened about. You know, it's the reality was nothing like the way I'd imagined it.
Yeah.
So it's,
and isn't that funny that that's just life, isn't it? In regards to even that whole trip, you know, if you had looked at that at the start of the journey, like we were talking about before, it would just look totally unachievable because of the fear that you would have placed upon it and the magnitude of what it was. But like you're saying there, it's just, and that's the whole thing in regards to the journey, is taking it step by step and just doing what you can at this moment in time and creating action in this moment. And that's the biggest thing that you can do is, you know, even in some of the sessions that you were set, you might not want to do them, but you just get your walking boots on, you get your bag on, and you start walking, and your mind changes from that point. And I think this is where we almost limit ourselves, is that we always think about what could go wrong, all right, rather than what could go right. And that's one of the things in regards to being able to like take account for our own thoughts about a situation, an event, especially something that's going to occur in the future, because you don't know what's going to happen. You can't predict the future, but you can go into action in this moment in time, and that's something that you're very good at doing. But also you're very good at reflecting and seeing how looking at constructive criticism for yourself now and being able to change things that have happened. But that's like a form of action again in this present moment of being able to, what can I do to change this next time it comes up? And one of the tools that you did use, and we've talked about, and something that is like literally you do that all the time. And this we've gone on a full circle here, because we started off me saying about you writing your own blogs and on your Facebook posts and sort of capturing people's imagination by going and doing that. And you almost did a little bit of journaling for everyone to see, which is quite a daunting thing. And again, it was something that you said that you wouldn't even have dreamed of doing at the start as well. And, you know, it wasn't a place of where you're trying to get attention, because a lot of that social media can be used in those ways. A lot these days is to go, look at me, look what I'm doing, but it's more of an honest account of you walking, how you're actually feeling in those moments as you were going on a day-to-day basis. Now, how do you feel in regards to journaling as a tool, how that's helped you along the whole of the journey? And, you know, like, that's been something that you've really done. Like, I haven't had, I don't see your journal. It's all for you to see. Obviously, you talked to me about stuff, but how has that helped you as a tool in self-growth?
Yeah, I mean, I started journaling really, or made sure it was embedded in my morning routine from January last year, so January 2021. So from when I started on the 1st of January to the day I left for Kathmandu, I had not missed a day. I had journaled every single day, every morning.
Yeah, that's consistency for you.
I have dogged determination, if nothing else. And it started off probably being more of a reflection of what I'd done. And then I started to shift that into what I was thinking. Just
Great.
From my blogs, I like the use of words. I like writing, and I really do. I should have been a travel writer. I think that was
not too late.
but that's how I started off with my journaling, and then there was a bit of a transition to, you know, instead of having to have really well constructed sentences with correct punctuation and you know, spelling had to be accurate. And I went from that to just throwing stuff down on a page that had just come into my head.
Yeah.
Didn't necessarily have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It was just the random thoughts that I was waking up with in the morning. Sometimes it might have been triggered by a dream that I'd just had before I'd woken up, or something to do with the pressures and the stresses that I was going through. Because, as you know, that during lockdown, we had a very difficult time at home as well. And my father was very poorly, and he then passed away, and he and my mother lived with us. And so it was a very stressful time. I was trying to be the one that was in control and completely organized and being the rock for everyone. And suddenly my journaling was a way of me being able to get rid of all of the anxieties and the stresses that I was feeling, and throwing it down on a piece of paper. And once it was out on the paper, it was so much better. I was then able to sit with it and realize that actually I could find my way through this. I could use
yourself as well, right? So it's that reliance of being, I suppose it's exactly like you're saying. Sometimes we have different voices that are going on in our heads, right? And we second guess what we're saying. And sometimes we don't say things and do things that we want to do ultimately. And just being able to have that, I suppose, writing down just gives you that freedom of speech, of actually giving that inner voice that sometimes we suppress, giving it that time to talk, right? And like you say, that just giving you a totally different perspective and angle from the stuff that's going on in your head.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just enabled my mind to calm, you know, rather than have all these thoughts going around in my head all the time. They were out on the piece of paper. I could just move on from them. But I also used it for a technique of two key things I was dealing with at that moment in time was lack of productivity. I procrastinated over everything, really. We were in lockdown. I was no longer working. So there was no purpose, really. I was helping to support family, but I was lost. I was lost in that. I didn't exist anymore, because I always used to think, and you told me I wasn't defined by my job. That did not define me. It was something that I did. But for me, that's what I thought gave me self-worth.
Yeah.
That was how I measured my success. And so I was in this real vacuum of not knowing who I was. And so gradually, over the days, the weeks, the months, I began to rediscover me and who I was and who I wanted to be, which were two quite different things, really, two different people. Who I wanted to be was in there somewhere, but it had been suppressed for years. And I needed to find that person again. So the journaling every day managed to help me do that. And I had two key themes: productivity and stress. And I would measure myself every day over, how productive am I going to be? How stressed am I feeling? Those sorts of things. So then I had the last thing that I always did on the journal in the morning would be, these are things I'm going to do for me. And these are the things I'm going to do for others. I know one of your examples is personal and professional. Well, for me, there was no professional anymore.
Yeah.
So I kind of swapped it around a little bit. So it was for me and for others. And I tried to keep a balance between those things and made sure that I found the time for me. And by finding time for me to do some of those things meant that I was far more productive at doing things for others as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's always that thing of starting that working inwardly has this projection outwardly as well, in multiple ways, of being able to, like you say, when you're feeling happy, you have less procrastination, and you really actually, when you feel happy, you want to do things for people more. And this is just me talking about myself, is that you never resent people for taking your time. Then you feel like you want to give it, right? So it feels more wholesome when you're in a place of feeling full of yourself, rather than this thing that we all, I mean, most of us do, and I'm not saying that I never do it now. We always have to catch ourselves, but it's looking for that validation or feeling, looking for happiness externally. Now, let's just filter this into an area now, because I know we've talked a lot about the journey up until this point, and it was almost like, you can describe it, you had a little bit of a light bulb moment or some form of awakening from that fear that we were talking about when you was it right near the top of Everest, was it, where you felt like a drop? I'm not going to say anything because I want you to explain it.
Yeah, it was, I think it was a culmination of a number of the things that had happened during that journey. And day one, where you fly into a place called Loch and you've flown in through all the mountains, you think, wow, this is beautiful, this is amazing. Then you have to start walking. First day I thought, I'm all right, I can do this, I'm fine. Second day, when we had to climb up to Namchi Bazaar, I sat in a tea house where we were staying that evening, and I thought, I can't do this. I'm going to say to everybody, you carry on, because there's a group of 14 of us that were doing the trek together. I'll stay here and you can come back and pick me up on the way back down. And that's where I was on day 2. And then I thought, actually, why am I wanting to say that? What is it? Why am I here? And I thought, that's crazy, because I actually want to get to Everest Basecamp. I've trained for this. I've been doing this training for 12 months. There is no reason for me not to be able to go. And we had guides. So we had a main guide and 2 assistant guides who were Sherpas. Sherpas being, people tend to, and I I always used to think that a Sherpa was somebody who carried your stuff for you up in the Himalayas. What I didn't realize that it's almost like a clan, sort of a group of people. So the Sherpas are the McDonald's in Scotland.
Yeah.
They are a group of people that share a surname, and the Sherpas, obviously, they live.
Not McDonald's, the fast food chain, no.
No. No, definitely not. But the Sherpas actually live on the sides of the mountains up in and the higher parts of the Himalayas. So their bodies are finely tuned to living and working in that sort of environment. But what struck me more than anything else was these people, they were Buddhists, and this isn't about a religion at all. It was about the way they were. And these people were just the kindest, most gentle, but the strongest people I've ever come across. They desperately wanted us to succeed in reaching our dreams. And they would do anything they could to help us support that. But they also had an expectation that we would do it. So it was the Sherpas, and I because I was one of the slower ones at the back. I hasten to add, I was about 25 years older than everybody else. Well, so in my defense, I was going at the pace that I knew that I could sustain.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of Sherpas that actually stayed with the group at the back. They always do. We stretch out quite a bit. And through the journey, I'm going to ramble now because I'm going off on a tangent again. One of the things that I noticed about the difference between the journey that I had and the journey that the vast majority of the others in the group had was that they were there specifically to get to the goal at the end, which was to get to the base camp. For me, it was about the journey. It was about discovering myself as much as achieving a goal. And I think that what I benefited from the journey was far greater than standing on that rock up at 5,364 meters. And that journey was shared with people who exuded the calmness, the quiet confidence, the compassion that I wanted to show myself. So I wanted to have those qualities and show those qualities in the way that they did. They weren't there for show. They weren't there, for any other reason. It was completely altruistic. They were there for us. And that was all they wanted, was for us to have a fantastic journey and to achieve what we'd set out to achieve. So I spent a lot of time with them, and I talked to them, and I began to understand a little bit more about their life, about their faith. And as I said, this is not about a religion. This is about a being. It's more about those personal qualities, about how they live. And as the journey was going on, I thought, this is the type of person I want to be. And they did teach me such a lot. I saw more. I could name almost all of the mountains because I asked them what they were called. And they were telling me about them. We were talking about how they survived, the fact that they'd had 2 years in lockdown with no income at all, no handouts. The government had given them nothing. They had tourism. Our type of tourism was what sustained them. That was their income for them, and they had nothing for 2 years. But how they survived those 2 years, and at no point did they feel as though they were hard done by. They foraged, they helped each other, they were there to support everyone else in their community, and they found a way of surviving with nothing. And it really put things into perspective, because I think as a nation, perhaps we have much higher expectations. And by higher expectations, I think they are lower expectations. We expected, you know, to be given things, to have all our luxuries, to have our heating, to have, you know, food delivered, you know, all those things. And if all of that had been stripped away, how would we have survived?
Yeah.
How would we have helped each other? And I think from that, it humbled me. And I'd like to think that the lessons I learned on that journey from the people I was with are ones that will stay with me for my lifetime now, and hopefully will be reflected in the way I behave and towards others. Just showing that level of kindness.
And that's one of the gifts of going somewhere like that. And I felt like that as well. I mean, got a little bit of history in regards to being in the British military. I work with a lot of Nepali people, and I always found them really lovely, warm, but very solid people who could, you know, they were strong mentally and physically. And that's one of the things that I think the take home message from that is, like, from having these journeys, that experience, it's not about going and ticking something off your list. It's about what are the bits that you can take from that experience. And that, I know that for myself anyways, from the traveling that I did post sort of, I suppose it's a little bit of an awakening, was a lot different to the traveling that I did prior, because it was what am I learning from every person that I meet, and how can I take these little bits to create the person that I want to be, rather than just living unconsciously and being. And that, I think that that's one of the great things about traveling, is that if I think it's very hard to be fully yourself and not be influenced by your environment if you've never stepped outside of it. And that you get these life lessons that you hold on for the rest of your life when you start to reach, you know, when of going and looking for something external or something in the future which is going to bring you happiness. Now you know, and you're looking from past experiences, that actually it's from a lot of from that the Buddhist philosophy is being grateful for what you have now, and what can you do now, and what can you be grateful for at this present moment. It's a lot more of a very present place as such. So they're rich, not rich in regards to wealth. It's one of the most poorest countries in the world, but also they're rich in their own sense of well-being and actually feeling enough, which is probably that thing that is cultivated through looking at the present moment and being gratuitous of what we have now. It's a lovely way to wrap up this conversation. One final question, which is totally against what we've just had said, is what's next? What have you got planned in the future?
Well, having returned from Nepal, saying I'm never going to walk up a hill ever again, and I just needed to do nothing, and I've been doing that for the last 2.5 weeks. Got back on to training this week. Oh no, last week. I'm now Tuesday, aren't I? So I've done a week of training. Thinking, where am I? And I'm going to, my next goal is to run the Loch Ness Marathon in October. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a walker when I started with a goal to walk to Everest Basecamp. I'm certainly not a runner. And here I am with another goal to do something which is way outside of my comfort zone. But for me, again, it's not about the end goal, it's about the journey I'm going to be on over the next 6 months to get there. So, yeah.
Great. Well, that was fantastic. Really enjoyed speaking again, and that was a lot more in depth than our previous conversation anyway, and a little bit more targeted. with my questions. But I think people will get a lot from that, a lot of inspiration, and a lot of insight as well. You know, a lot of insight of, it's not just that, like we said, that thing of achieving a goal, it's the journey. And that's what this whole podcast video, whatever you want to call it, I don't even know what it is yet, is about. It's about the journey. And that's what Lone Wolf means, is you walking your own path of self-discovery and being authentic. So thank you very much, Kerry. Really appreciate your time. We'll look forward to the Loch Ness Marathon, which I'm doing as well.
Probably somewhat faster than me.
Okay, right, see you later, Kerry.
Bye.
Bye.